The thunder of hooves against hardened earth shattered the pre-dawn silence as Kestrel Nightwind pressed his stallion harder through the mesquite and sage. Blood streaked down his bronzed shoulder from the rifle ball that had grazed him during his escape from Fort Bowie. But the real pain came from what he'd overheard in the commander's tent, plans to raid the peaceful settlements along Willow Creek at sunrise. His horse stumbled, foam flecking its dark muzzle. They'd been riding hard for 3 hours, and even his sure-footed Mustang couldn't maintain this pace much longer. The first pale fingers of dawn were already creeping across the desert sky when he spotted the cluster of adobe houses and weathered wooden structures that made up the tiny settlement of Esperanza. Too late. Smoke already curled from behind the grain mill. Kestrel's jaw tightened as he spurred his mount toward the village center, but a small figure stumbling from the burning schoolhouse stopped him cold. A girl, no more than 7 or 8, her calico dress torn and soot-stained, ran directly into his path. "Please save my mama," she cried, her blue eyes wide with terror as she looked up at him. Most children in these parts would have screamed at the sight of an Apache warrior, but this one seemed to see past his long black hair and traditional leather vest to something deeper. The bad men took her to the church. They're gonna hurt her. Without hesitation, Kestrel swung down from his horse and knelt before the trembling child. "Where is your father, little sparrow?" "Dead." The word came out as barely a whisper. "The soldiers killed him yesterday when he tried to stop them from taking our horses." Soldiers. Not Apache raiders, as the settlement would surely believe, but cavalry deserters, the worst kind of men with military training but no honor to restrain them. "Stay here," Kestrel commanded, but the girl grabbed his arm. "No, I'm coming with you. Mama told me to find help, and you're the help I found." He studied her face, the determined set of her small jaw despite her tears, the way she stood straighter when she spoke of her mother. This child had courage that many grown warriors would envy. "What is your name, brave one?" "Celestine Morningstar. And I know you're not one of the bad men, even though you look like the Apache the soldiers say are burning everything. You have kind eyes." Before Kestrel could respond, gunfire erupted from the direction of the small stone church. A woman's scream pierced the air, high and desperate. "That's Mama." Celestine started toward the sound, but Kestrel caught her shoulder. "I will get your mother, but you must promise to do exactly as I say." He pulled his skinning knife from his belt and pressed it into her small hands. "Hide in the root cellar, behind the mercantile. If anyone comes who isn't me or your mother, you use this." Celestine nodded solemnly, wrapping her fingers around the horn handle. "Will you really save her?" Kestrel looked toward the church where orange flames now licked at the wooden bell tower. Inside, he could hear at least 3 different male voices, shouting over a woman's sobs. "I give you my word, little sparrow. Your mother will live to see another sunrise." As he checked his rifle and the twin Colt revolvers at his hips, Kestrel didn't notice the way Celestine's eyes followed his every movement, or how something shifted in her young heart when he called her by the tender Apache nickname for beloved, "Child." The church door hung broken on its hinges, revealing a scene that made Kestrel's blood run cold. 3 deserters in torn blue uniforms had cornered a woman against the altar, her auburn hair disheveled, and her green dress ripped at the shoulder. Even in her terror, she maintained a dignity that spoke of inner steel, the same quality he'd recognized in her daughter. "Please," Valentina Morningstar whispered, backing against the carved wooden crucifix. "Just take what you want and leave us be." "Oh, we intend to take what we want," leered the tallest deserter, his sergeant's stripe still visible on his filthy sleeve. "Starting with you, pretty lady." Kestrel moved like shadow-made flesh, his moccasins silent on the stone floor. Defeat. First deserter never knew what hit him. One moment he was reaching for Valentina, the next he was unconscious on the ground with a rifle butt-shaped dent in his skull. "Apache." The sergeant spun around, fumbling for his sidearm. "No," Kestrel said quietly, his Colt already drawn and steady. "Just a man who doesn't like bullies." The third deserter, a wiry fellow with yellowed teeth, grabbed Valentina around the waist and pressed a knife to her throat. "Drop your weapons, Redskin, or the lady gets a second smile." For a heartbeat, Kestrel's eyes met Valentina's. She was afraid, yes, but not broken. In her green gaze, he saw the same fierce protectiveness that had driven her daughter to seek help, the same quiet courage that had sustained this family through loss and hardship. "Let her go," Kestrel said, his voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded sudden violence. "And I'll let you walk out of here," the sergeant laughed harshly. "2 against 1, savage. I like those odds better." What happened next took less than 10 seconds. Kestrel threw his knife with surgical precision, the blade finding the gap between the deserter's ribs before he could cut Valentina's throat. As the man fell, Kestrel pivoted and put 2 bullets center mass in the sergeant before the man could clear leather. In the ringing silence that followed, Valentina sank to her knees, shaking. Kestrel quickly checked that all 3 deserters were dead, then knelt beside her. "Are you hurt?" His voice was gentle now, nothing like the deadly calm he'd used on her attackers. She shook her head, unable to speak, and he noticed how she flinched slightly when he reached out to help her stand. Not from fear of him, he realized, but from the natural reaction of someone who'd been brutalized and expected more of the same. "Your daughter sent me," he said softly. "Celestine. She's safe." At her child's name, Valentina's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down her face as she looked up at him. "You came because my little girl asked you to. She has a warrior's heart." How could I refuse? Something passed between them in that moment. A recognition that went deeper than the circumstances of their meeting. Kestrel found himself studying the delicate curve of her jaw, the way her hair caught the early morning light streaming through the stained glass windows. And Valentina, despite everything she'd just endured, felt an unexpected flutter in her chest at the kindness in this stranger's dark eyes. "I should get you to your daughter," Kestrel said, reluctantly breaking the spell. As he helped her to her feet, their hands touched for just an instant longer than necessary. Neither pulled away immediately, and in that brief contact, both felt the spark of something that would change their lives forever. Outside, smoke continued to rise from the settlement, and they could hear the distant sound of the real cavalry, approaching, summoned no doubt by someone who'd seen the flames and assumed the worst. "They'll blame you for this," Valentina said suddenly, understanding the danger he'd put himself in by helping her. Kestrel nodded grimly. "Apache in a burned settlement with dead soldiers. It won't matter that I saved you. Then we'd better make sure they hear the truth." The blue-clad cavalry thundered into Esperanza, just as Kestrel and Valentina emerged from the burning church, and the lead rider's hand moved immediately to his saber when he spotted the Apache warrior supporting the disheveled woman. "Stand down, you murdering savage." Captain Harrington's voice boomed across the settlement square as 24 troopers formed a semicircle around them, carbines raised. "Wait!" Valentina stepped protectively in front of Kestrel, her torn dress and obvious distress only seeming to confirm the soldier's worst assumptions. "This man saved my life," but Captain Harrington had already made up his mind. 3 dead deserters in cavalry uniforms, a burned settlement, and an Apache warrior. The evidence seemed clear enough. "Step away from him, ma'am. We'll handle this." "Papa!" Celestine burst from her hiding place behind the mercantile, running straight toward them despite the forest of rifle barrels. "Papa saved Mama!" The word hit Kestrel like a physical blow. In her terror and gratitude, the child had claimed him as family, and something deep in his chest tightened at the innocent declaration. Harrington's weathered face creased in confusion. "Papa, this man risked everything to warn us," Valentina said firmly, her arm sliding around Kestrel's waist in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "The deserters you're looking for are dead inside the church, Captain. He killed them to save me." "Deserters?" Harrington's certainty wavered slightly. An older woman emerged from one of the adobe houses, her gray hair escaping from its pins. "It's true, Captain," called Constance Whitehorse, the settlement's unofficial leader. "I saw those 3 bluebellies ride in yesterday. They killed Tobias Morningstar and stole half our livestock before they holed up in the church with his widow." Celestine had reached them now, throwing herself against Kestrel's legs with complete trust. "Tell them, Papa. Tell them you're one of the good ones." Kestrel's hand came down gently on the girl's blonde head, his throat tight with emotion he hadn't expected. In 26 years, no one had ever looked at him the way this child did, with absolute faith and love. "The fort's commanding officer sent me to warn you," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving Harrington's face. "I overheard the deserters planning to raid at sunrise. I rode all night to get here first. You're telling me you risked court-martial and worse to save a settlement full of white folks?" Harrington's tone was skeptical but no longer hostile. "I'm telling you I couldn't stand by and let innocent people die." Kestrel's arm tightened slightly around Valentina as she swayed against him, exhaustion and shock finally taking their toll. Constance stepped forward, her sharp eyes taking in the family tableau before her. "Captain, this man deserves our gratitude, not our suspicion. While you were still sleeping in your warm barracks, he was riding through the desert to save our lives." Harrington studied the scene, the protective way the Apache warrior held the widow, the child clinging to his legs, the obvious devastation that spoke of a hard-fought battle rather than a massacre. "Stand down, men," he ordered finally, his gaze fixed on Kestrel with grudging respect. "Seems we owe you a debt, warrior." But even as the immediate danger passed, Kestrel could see the calculation in some of the troopers' eyes. An Apache who'd killed soldiers, even deserters, was still a dangerous precedent. Word would spread and there would be those who wouldn't care about the circumstances. "You can't go back," Valentina said softly, reading his thoughts. "They'll find a way to make you pay for this," he nodded grimly. He'd known the cost when he'd made his choice, but looking down at Celestine's trusting face and feeling the warmth of Valentina's body against his, he found he couldn't regret it. "Then I guess I'll have to find somewhere new to call home," he said. Celestine looked up at him with eyes that held wisdom beyond her years. "You could stay here with us. Mama needs someone to take care of her and I need a papa." The simple words hung in the air like a prayer, and Kestrel felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't thinking about survival or duty, or the endless cycle of conflict between his people and the whites. He was thinking about family. The abandoned homestead sat 3 miles upstream from Esperanza, its previous owners victims of last winter's influenza outbreak. The small ranch house needed work, broken shutters, a leaking roof, and a garden choked with weeds. But it offered something Kestrel had never dared dream of, a place where an Apache warrior and a white widow could build a life together without the weight of constant scrutiny. "It's perfect," Valentina said, standing in the doorway of what would become their bedroom. Sunlight streamed through the single window, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the warm air. Kestrel wasn't looking at the room. He was watching the way the light caught the copper highlights in her hair, the gentle curve of her smile, as she imagined their future here. 3 weeks had passed since the church incident. 3 weeks of stolen moments and careful courtship under the watchful eyes of Esperanza's residents. "Are you certain about this?" he asked quietly. "Taking an Apache husband won't make life easier for you or Celestine." Valentina turned to face him, her green eyes steady and sure. "Tobias was a good man and I'll always love his memory. But he's gone, and you're here. You saved us, protected us, and somewhere along the way." She stepped closer, her hand finding his chest. "You became home." The wedding took place at sunset on the ranch's front porch, with Constance Whitehorse officiating and half the settlement in attendance. Celestine stood between them in a new yellow dress, holding a bouquet of desert wildflowers she'd picked herself. "Do you, Kestrel Nightwind, take Valentina to be your wife, to protect and cherish for all your days?" Constance's voice carried clearly in the still evening air. "I do." His voice was rough with emotion. "And do you accept Celestine as my daughter to raise and guide as if she were born of my blood?" "I do," he repeated, kneeling to Celestine's level. "Little sparrow will you have me as your father?" "Yes, Papa." She threw her arms around his neck, and several of the women in the crowd wiped away tears. When Valentina spoke her vows, her voice never wavered. "I take you not just as my husband, but as the father my daughter needs, and the partner I choose freely, with all my heart." The kiss that sealed their union was gentle, reverent, and when they broke apart, Kestrel saw his own wonder reflected in his new wife's eyes. That night, after Celestine had been tucked into her small bedroom with promises of pancakes in the morning, Kestrel and Valentina sat on their porch watching the stars emerge over the desert. "I never thought I'd marry again," Valentina said softly, her head resting against his shoulder. "I never thought I'd marry at all." His arm tightened around her. "Apache warriors don't usually get to choose peaceful lives, and white widows don't usually fall in love with Apache warriors." She tilted her face up to his. "We're writing our own story, aren't we?" Instead of answering with words, he kissed her again, this time with the passion he'd held carefully in check during their courtship. When she responded with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his long hair, he lifted her in his arms and carried her across the threshold of their shared life. Their wedding night was tender exploration and whispered promises, the joining of two souls who'd found in each other something neither had dared hope for. Outside, coyotes sang to the moon. But inside the little ranch house, a new family was being born from love and choice rather than convention. In the morning, Kestrel woke to the sound of Celestine's laughter and the smell of coffee brewing. Valentina was already up, moving around their kitchen with quiet efficiency, her hair braided loosely down her back. "Good morning, husband," she said, turning to smile at him, and the simple domestic greeting hit him with surprising force. "Good morning, wife." Celestine burst through the door, still in her nightgown. "Papa, look." She held up a tiny lizard she'd caught in the garden. "Can I keep him?" As Kestrel gravely examined the small creature and explained why it would be happier free, Valentina watched her new family with a heart full of quiet joy. This wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she chose, and that made all the difference. 6 months into their marriage, Kestrel was repairing the corral fence when riders approached. From the east, his hand moved instinctively to his rifle, but he recognized Captain Harrington's bay gelding among the 4 horses. "Afternoon, Nightwind," Harrington called, dismounting with the easy grace of a career cavalryman. "Mind if we water our horses?" "Of course." Kestrel gestured toward the well, but his eyes remained wary. Military visits were rarely social calls. Valentina emerged from the house, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. Celestine peeked out from behind her mother's skirts, curious but cautious. "Mrs. Nightwind," Harrington touched his hat brim, respectfully. "Smells like you've been baking." "Apple pie," Celestine piped up, her initial shyness forgotten. "Papa taught me how to peel the apples without breaking the skin." One of the younger soldiers, a freckled Corporal Kestrel didn't recognize, shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Captain, sir, are we really going to—" "Corporal Mitchell." Harrington's tone carried a warning. "Mind your manners." The exchange sent warning bells ringing in Kestrel's mind. "What brings you out here, Captain?" Harrington's weathered face grew serious. "There's been trouble up in the Dragoon Mountains. Band of Chiricahua jumped a supply wagon 3 days ago. 1 trooper dead, 2 wounded." Kestrel's jaw tightened. He'd feared this day would come. "And you think I had something to do with it?" "No." Harrington's answer was firm and immediate. "But there are folks at the territorial capital who think all Apache are the same. They're pushing for aggressive action against any hostile presence in the territory." "Kestrel isn't hostile." Valentina stepped closer to her husband, her chin raised defiantly. "He's a rancher and a family man." "I know that, ma'am. But politicians in Tucson don't know your husband personally." Harrington pulled a folded document from his coat. "This is an order for all Apache individuals not currently on reservation land to report to the San Carlos agency within 30 days. The paper felt like a death sentence in Kestrel's hands. San Carlos was a place where Apache spirits went to die, penned up like cattle on land that couldn't support them, dependent on government rations that came sporadically, if at all. "There has to be another way," Valentina said desperately. "Actually, there might be." Harrington glanced at his men, then back at Kestrel. "The Army needs scouts, men who know Apache tactics and can help prevent raids before they happen. The pay is decent, and it would give you legal status to remain off reservation." Kestrel studied the captain's face, reading the unspoken subtext. "You're asking me to hunt my own people. I'm asking you to help prevent bloodshed on both sides. You proved at Esperanza that you value innocent life over tribal loyalty. This is just extending that principle." The weight of the choice pressed down on Kestrel's shoulders. Stay with his family and become a hunter of Apache warriors, or lose everything he'd built here and face exile to a reservation where his wife and daughter couldn't follow. "I need time to think." "You have until tomorrow morning," Harrington said, not unkindly. "The territorial governor wants an answer by the end of the week." After the soldiers left, the family sat around their kitchen table in heavy silence. Celestine had gone unusually quiet, sensing the adult tension even if she didn't fully understand its source. "You can't go to that reservation," Valentina said finally. "I've heard the stories. People starve there. And I can't hunt Apache warriors who are only trying to protect their own families." Kestrel's voice was raw with anguish. "How do I choose between my people and my family?" "We're your people now," Celestine said suddenly, her young voice cutting. "Through the debate. You, me, and Mama, we're your tribe, out of the mouths of babes." Kestrel looked at his daughter, and she was his daughter now in every way that mattered, and saw the truth he'd been struggling to accept. His loyalty wasn't to race or politics or the complicated history between Apache and white. His loyalty was to the people sitting around this table, to the life they'd built together, to the future they were creating one day at a time. "Then I guess I know what I have to do," he said quietly. That night, as Valentina lay in his arms, she felt the tension in his muscles, the way he held her just a little too tightly. "Whatever you decide," she whispered, "we'll face it together." But even as she spoke the words, they both knew that some choices couldn't be shared, some burdens had to be carried alone. Dawn was still an hour away when Kestrel slipped from bed, dressed silently, and made his way to the small corral where his stallion waited. The animal nickered softly in recognition, and Kestrel pressed his forehead against the horse's neck, drawing strength from the familiar contact. "Going somewhere, Papa?" He turned to find Celestine standing in the barn doorway, still in her nightgown, but with her mother's determined expression on her small face. "I have to take care of something, little sparrow. You're going to tell those soldier men you won't be their Apache hunter." Sometimes her perceptiveness startled him. "Yes. And then we'll have to leave here." It wasn't a question. Kestrel knelt beside her, taking her small hands in his calloused ones. "Would that frighten you?" Celestine considered this gravely. "Will we still be a family?" "Always." "Then I'm not scared. Families stick together, even when things get hard." The simple wisdom of a child cut straight to the heart of his dilemma. Kestrel pulled her into a fierce embrace, breathing in the scent of soap and innocence that always clung to her hair. "Go wake your mother. Tell her it's time." An hour later, Captain Harrington found them loading their wagon in the pre-dawn darkness. "Running?" he asked, though his tone held more understanding than judgment. "Choosing," Kestrel corrected, securing the last of their possessions. "My family over politics, my conscience over convenience." Harrington dismounted and walked closer, his expression troubled. "They'll send bounty hunters after you. $1,000 reward for an Apache who refused military service. Let them come." "Kestrel." Valentina's voice carried a note of warning as she spotted riders approaching from 3 different directions. Not cavalry this time, rough men in civilian clothes with hungry eyes and weapons ready. "Nightwind." The leader's voice carried across the morning air. "By order of the territorial government, you're under arrest." Kestrel's hand moved to his rifle, but Celestine grabbed his arm. "Papa, don't let them make you into the bad man." Her words stopped him cold. She was right. Violence would only confirm everything these bounty hunters believed about Apache savagery, but surrender meant San Carlos and separation from his family. "There's a third option," Harrington said quietly, positioning his horse between the bounty hunters and the Nightwind family. "Lieutenant Anderson," the young officer from the previous day, rode forward, leading a saddled cavalry mount. "Sir, this man has just enlisted as an army scout. Get him sworn in. Now." Understanding flashed in Anderson's eyes. "Raise your right hand, Mr. Nightwind." The oath was administered quickly, witnessed by soldiers whose testimony would hold up in any territorial court. When it was finished, Harrington turned to face the bounty hunters. "Gentlemen, you're interfering with an official army operation. I suggest you move along." The lead bounty hunter's face flushed with rage. "You can't protect him forever, Captain." "No," Harrington agreed, "but I can protect him long enough for him to prove himself, which is all any man deserves." As the frustrated bounty hunters rode away, Kestrel found himself in army blue for the first time in his life, the weight of the uniform strange on his shoulders. "This makes me a legitimate scout," he said slowly, "but it doesn't solve the fundamental problem." "Actually, it does." Harrington smiled slightly. "Scout Nightwind, your first assignment is to establish a liaison post here on your ranch. Monitor Apache activity, report any signs of raiding parties, and serve as a communication link between the local settlements and Fort Bowie." Valentina's eyes widened with understanding. "You mean we can stay?" "More than that," Harrington continued. "The Army will pay for improvements to the ranch, provide regular supply deliveries, and offer protection for your family. In return, Scout Nightwind helps keep the peace." It wasn't perfect. Kestrel would still wear the blue uniform of his people's oppressors, still walk the line between two worlds that often seemed irreconcilably opposed, but it offered something precious, the chance to serve both his conscience and his family. "I accept," he said simply. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching another desert sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Celestine climbed into Kestrel's lap. "Are you sad about being a soldier now, Papa?" He considered the question seriously. "No, little sparrow. Sometimes the uniform doesn't make the man makes the uniform." Valentina leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his. "Besides," she said softly, "you're not really a soldier. You're a peacekeeper. There's a difference." Looking out over the land they'd chosen to defend, surrounded by the family they'd chosen to love, Kestrel felt something settle in his chest. For the first time since that desperate night ride to Esperanza, he was exactly where he belonged. 5 years had transformed the Nightwind Ranch from a struggling homestead into a thriving operation that served as an unofficial embassy between two worlds. The main house had been expanded to include Kestrel's official quarters as territorial liaison, while additional buildings housed the small team of mixed-blood interpreters who worked under his supervision. Celestine, now 12 and tall for her age, had inherited her adoptive father's gift for languages and her mother's diplomatic grace. She moved easily between the Apache children who sometimes visited with peaceful delegations and the white settler families who came seeking Kestrel's mediation in land disputes. "Papa," she called, running toward the corral where Kestrel was, training a new horse with methods that combined Apache horsemanship with techniques he'd learned from Mexican vaqueros. "Riders coming from the east. Looks like Chief Nietzsche." Kestrel handed her the lead rope and shaded his eyes against the afternoon sun. 3 Apache riders approached under a white flag, their leader recognizable by his distinctive war bonnet and the careful dignity of his bearing. Nietzsche, son of the great Cochise and one of the last free Apache chiefs, had been conducting a careful dance with the territorial government for months. Neither fully at war nor fully at peace, his band survived in the high country, through a combination of traditional hunting and carefully negotiated truces. "Kestrel Nightwind," Nietzsche said formally as he dismounted. The use of both names, Apache and White, was a mark of respect that acknowledged Kestrel's dual heritage by choice. "Chief Nietzsche, you honor my home." The older Apache studied Kestrel's face, noting the years of sun and responsibility that had weathered his features. "You have found an interesting path, brother?" They sat beneath the ramada Kestrel had built using traditional Apache methods, sharing coffee while Nietzsche's warriors cared for their horses. Valentina emerged from the house with fresh tortillas and honey, greeting the chief in carefully practiced Apache before withdrawing to give the men privacy. "Your woman learns our tongue," Nietzsche observed approvingly, "as I learn hers every day." Kestrel's slight smile faded as he studied his visitor's expression. "But you didn't ride 2 days to discuss my marriage. What troubles you, brother?" Nietzsche was quiet for a long moment, gazing out over the well-tended fields where Apache and Mexican agricultural techniques had created something uniquely productive. "The young warriors grow restless. They see our people on the reservation, dependent on white man's food, forgetting the old ways. They say I am weak to seek peace." Kestrel understood the deeper implications, and they look south, toward Mexico, thinking of Geronimo. Some do. Others look here to what you have built and wonder if there might be another way. There might be. Kestrel leaned forward, his voice dropping to carry only to Nietzsche's ears. "The territorial governor has authorized me to make an offer. A reservation, yes, but here in the Dragoons. Your traditional hunting grounds. Govern yourselves according to Apache law, with minimal federal oversight." Nietzsche's eyes sharpened. "In exchange for peace, an end to raiding, and cooperation in preventing other bands from using your territory as a base for attacks on settlers. You would have us police our own brothers? I would have you protect your people's future." Kestrel's tone remained respectful but firm. "The days of free-ranging war bands are ending, brother. The choice now is between honorable compromise and eventual destruction." That evening, as Nietzsche's delegation made camp near the ranch house, Celestine approached her father where he stood watching the Apache warriors tend their horses. "They're going to say yes, aren't they?" she asked perceptively. "I hope so. Why?" "Because if they don't, you'll have to hunt them down eventually, and that would break your heart." Sometimes her insight still startled him. "You're very wise for 12, little sparrow. Mama says I get it from you, the seeing both sides thing." 3 days later, Nietzsche gave his answer. The Dragoon Mountain Reservation would become reality, a bold experiment in Apache self-governance that attracted attention from Washington to Mexico City. The ceremony marking the agreement took place at sunset on Apache holy ground, witnessed by representatives from both cultures. Kestrel stood between worlds in his role as facilitator, wearing traditional Apache dress with his Army Scout badge prominently displayed. As the sun set behind the Dragoon peaks, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold, Chief Nietzsche placed his hand on Kestrel's shoulder. "You have found the narrow path, brother, between war and surrender, between the old ways and the new." Later, as the celebration continued around carefully tended fires, Valentina found her husband standing apart from the crowds, lost in thought. "Regrets?" she asked softly. "No." He pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Just wondering what comes next." "Next?" Celestine appeared beside them, having inherited her parents' gift for silent movement. "Next, we keep building bridges, Papa. One family at a time, one friendship at a time." Looking out over the gathering where Apache children played with settler kids, where warriors and cavalry officers shared stories around the same fire, Kestrel felt a deep satisfaction settle in his chest. They had done the impossible, created a place where two worlds could meet without bloodshed, where love could overcome prejudice, where a desperate child's cry for help had grown into something that might just change the territory forever. "Yes," he said, gathering his family close as the first stars appeared overhead. "One bridge at a time." In the distance, coyotes began their evening song, and the sound carried no threat now, only the wild music of a land finally learning to live with all its children.